there will be no real non-controlled currency in the world.
We're coming for you, Banks.
Increasing the block size to 32 megabytes right now. What would be the top 5 arguments that would get hurled against me?
Oh, that's a good one.
There are a few that the big blockers got right.
Ching, like all these coins splash into the wallets of all the winners. I love that.
There's a new threat out there. It's crypto.
Hello and welcome back to the Bitcoin Cash podcast, following Bitcoin Cash on its rise to global reserve currency. This is episode number 130. Big ints featuring Jason Drysdale. Today is Thursday, the 26th of September, 2024. Super quick shout out to our fundme.cash campaign. Still need a few BCH there. And after this episode, I think maybe I'll just finish it if people don't want to donate, but whatever. Go over there and donate. Fundme.cash. Quick price check. USD $344.60 for 100 megasats, slightly up. One BTC sat buys 182 BCH, 184 BCH sats, and one ETH is 740 something megasats. I changed this, but I don't know what happened. All right, special reminder, it's a Jason Drysdale episode, so if you're feeling confused or not following what's going on, relax. That's a good thing. That's what it feels like to learn, so just let it wash over you and it'll come to you. Okay, our guest, Jason Drysdale. Libwise, Chaingraph, BitAuth IDE, Cash Tokens, VM Limits, and the Big Ints chip author, the man of 1,000 different talents. How you been doing recently since we last caught up with you? Been busy, right?
Doing great. Yeah, I've been busy. Thanks for the intro. That's a good intro.
Well, I keep adding stuff to this slide. Eventually, like, we're going to run out of room on this slide if you keep ordering more software. So we'll see. Maybe we'll have to shrink the font size.
It's been a lot.
Yeah, it's been a lot. It's long journey in Bitcoin Cash. All right, let's get straight into it. We got to just crack on because we got a lot to cover. So update me on the set. Firstly, we already talked the VM Limits chip in episode 122, but there's been progress on that. Hit me with it. What's happened?
Just continued testing. Not too much. There've been a couple great technical feedback items, a couple corrections. Maybe there's still one technical item that that a couple stakeholders are talking about, but we are seeking final reviews. Please, we're interested in hearing what you think about the proposal now, and looking at our very extensive rationale. Every little detail has been documented. We've tried to really expand not only on where things will stand after this upgrade, but also where it puts us for future upgrades. So we have reviewed a lot of proposals that have been in the community over many years, like what happens if we increase the stack sizes even more? What happens if we increase the number limit even more? And in this case, that is what generated the Big Ints chip. What happens if we increase operation density? What happens if we increase operation overhead? There's like 5 or 6 others. You can check it out in the rationale. It's very dense, but hopefully written in a way that is a little bit more parsable, even if you're kind of new to the problems. A lot of this could be written as a series of equations, and there's a correct answer, and we have picked the exact answer that targets these limits right at the existing current limits. But the rationale is written in a slightly more human way so that hopefully it facilitates like piece by piece detailed review, and talks about in context each alternative, and what the pros and cons are. And there, for each question, there are really pretty obvious answers. It's quite nice that because we're truly basing it on the existing limits, there is very little that we have to even have as really a design decision. They're decisions that have either were made by Satoshi 14 years ago, and we have re-encoded them in like a they are things that were resolved in the years since then, 2014, 2015. In 2017, obviously, Bitcoin Cash had some important scalability improvements as part of the opt-in upgrade to get to Bitcoin Cash. When you opted into using Bitcoin Cash as a new transaction format, that was a scaling benefit. There are 2018, 2020, 2022. Yeah, there's a number of it's been a long time getting to here. But yeah, I encourage people to take a look at the rationale. We are definitely trying to get all of the stakeholders who have seen this since 2021 or whenever to come take a look at the very final where it stands. We have BCHN has I wouldn't say production ready, because production ready means more things to more people, but it is battle tested and quite well reviewed now. And we've got another month and a half or so to let people review that more specifically, because that's the most common implementation by the miners. Then also Liboth, the library that I wrote, that is very, very different, totally different approach to how it does the VM implementation, that is really geared towards developer tooling. So it has very different performance requirements. It treats the protocol very differently. So it's actually between the two of those, we have a very good cross section of all of the possible ways that the protocol could be pulled, sort of, where if we were just looking at a C++ implementation, it would be easy for us to miss things like, hey, what happens if a particular implementation has to have a naive data structure for this one thing? And Liboth is a good example of that, because it has super naive data structures for like everything, and it collects lots of stuff and has all sorts of debugging stuff, and it puts it all in BitAuth IDE and the editors and stuff. So it's a very good kind of test case of like, okay, we tried, we know that we're testing the performance really well over here. Now, like, how does it apply to if somebody does something like quite different with the protocol? Because the protocol is fundamentally eternal. Like, if we make a change to the protocol, it needs to be good, even if in the future miners are not primarily using BCHN, right? So we don't want the protocol to be heavily dependent on a particular implementation. So that work was very much accelerated in February of this year, when BCHN committed a full-time developer to the limits chip, and then has continued throughout the year. A lot more testing really since July, when things really sort of got more nailed down. A lot of people creating entirely new test suites. Some impressive work there. And a couple of the other implementations, even the ones that have not had production releases in a little while, are starting to work on patches, which is exciting. So one of them actually is in the chip now. BCHD has started on a pull request. And yeah, we'll see about other implementations over the next month or so. But it's looking good. We certainly feels good to have some eyes from each of the languages on what we have so far. And yeah, I think I've covered it. Yeah, the VM limits chip, I would say, is very close to finalized. So the kind of last call for technical reviews, and there's still some technical discussion talking about specifically, non-standard transactions and how a specific part of it works. But that's also good news, because non-standard transactions are by definition the ones that most Bitcoin Cash users have no clue about, and it is for most Bitcoin Cash users. They will consider these discussions, though we think they're important. Those of us working on the development, we think every little detail is important, because these things are permanent and forever. We want to get them really, really right. But most users probably don't care what we do with this class of depending on your opinion, either non-standard transactions or abuse vectors, depending on how you choose to frame it. But yeah, so I think we're getting very close to the end of technical reviews. technical reviews, both of the spec, which is what really matters before November, but then also of the nearing production ready implementations. I won't call them production ready until November 15th, but we would love to get more people looking at both of those, both the spec and the implementations. The other, each of the other full node implementations, I expect would also like to have reviews. So if people want to go take a look at those also. But yeah, things are looking and feeling good. I'm cautiously optimistic. This is, of course, it's taken a very long process to get here, including, so this began in 2021. The developer community was sort of ruminating on it for multiple years. A number of developers kind of pushed me to start working on it again at the end of 2023. And I dragged my feet. And when BCHN committed to working on it full time and to working on an implementation in February, I have since been full time as well on it. I'm excited. This is the getting to here took a long time. Getting to where we have a full technical proposal, very well specified, test vectors, benchmark data. So the benchmarks are actually trimmed down now and put into the repo. We have been benchmarking on significantly more, and these are this is the subset that truly matters. It's not just like the combinatorial generated, hundreds of types of the same exact things, though we do hundreds of types of different ways of doing BigInt. So it is now committed to the repo with some pretty graphs so that people can see that have been broken out by operation type, so you can see exactly how things impact the worst case performances. So yeah, super excited and happy with where the technical side is now, and now the final lap begins of the human consensus process, which is no small feat, and will take a lot of work as well. But that's where people listening come in. Please let us know what you think about the proposals as they stand, and we're looking for final reviews. If there's anything anybody can find in the rationale or something like that, even if it's just something that isn't really clearly. It doesn't feel like it's clearly explained in the rationale. We want to get those in just like for historical purposes. It's important that there's a history of exactly why each little thing was derived in the way it was, or the trade-offs that were considered in those ways. So that kind of feedback is amazing. And then also we're looking for stakeholder statements. If you are a user of Bitcoin Cash, or you're a business, a miner, payment processor, if you have an interest in this at all, if VM limits matters to you or BigInt matters to you, we would deeply appreciate your statement of support or disapproval. Let us know exactly why, and it will go in the chip very shortly. We're going to start putting statements now that the chip is really very close to finalized. Statements can start to be about the exact product that is there, and the exact words, so people can be confident that they're reviewing that and putting their name on specifically one product. But
yeah, I was going to say, because what's the plan for it? Do you have a deadline, in your mind? Like you say, okay, we're just getting to the final bits, but the last 20% takes 80% of the time sometimes. So like it's going to be hard for me to sign off on something if it isn't the finalized version.
Okay, sure. Well, so the chip process, depending on what the milestones you follow, one of the specifications that had a good set of milestones indicates that we should lock it in by October 1st, and that's why all this stuff is happening this week. We're just making sure we are ready to finalize here in a matter of days. So yes, I am treading lightly on saying that it's final, because there is one technical discussion happening still right now. But I'm confident that we have done the technical background work to make that a discussion, not about what our options are, but what our values are, what stakeholders actually want to see in there. And again, it's on a part of the proposal that most people don't consider to be what they think of when they're working with Bitcoin Cash. They're not worried about what kinds of transactions can or can't be created and mined in a block if you rent a bunch of mining power and write some special software to do your own special thing and send a specially crafted transaction to try to get within some different limit set. So there's a technical discussion happening there, and that's why I want to tread lightly about saying it's final, but because I want to make sure that we've heard all of the stakeholders there. But I think implementations are well along, and regardless of what the solution is on that technical question, it is a choice of a number in a defined spot. We know exactly where it is, and it's going to be there's kind of you can only do so much research on the different options, and then you kind of have to make a decision. And the chip right now tries to take a very as hands-off conservative approach as possible. Like, if possible, we try not to touch something, and that's explained in the rationale, so you can see exactly the places where, like, there's probably 5 or 6 places in the rationale where the last sentence is, and this chip considers this to be out of scope. So there's a lot of that. But yeah, I think the technical specs are, if not fully finalized, they're very, very, very close. Pending that number, basically, and a technical discussion. And I can't tell. It seems like people are either posing to fight it out over that one number or not. I'm not sure. I'll go for a walk in the woods and come back and see what people think. And but yeah. And then the next step of the process is stakeholder statements. And I'm confident enough now that regardless of kind of what happens with that technical question, I've gone ahead and contacted already this week more than 100 mostly developers, but also representatives of companies and like marketing teams and kind of adoption people who have been working in Bitcoin Cash since 2021 or so, and maybe stretching that a little bit more. Just that all the people I've worked with directly on these past proposals. So I'm trying to pull some people in, even who have not been who've not looked at the technical development in a while, see if we can't get some additional technical review in this final stretch, and get statements from people who want to be involved. But yeah,
so you're not worried that that's going to start up, if you're pulling in outside people at the later stages, then aren't they going to start a whole fresh round of, what about this, what about that, etc.?
A little bit, but many of these people have already, again, this proposal is from 2021. I'm contacting people who saw this proposal the first time. Right. In a lot of cases, they're like, "Oh, you're still working on that?" So, by and large, the feedback is mostly like, "Wow, I can't believe it's actually done." So yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic. I do expect for sure we're going to get some mad disapproval statements, probably specifically on that number I mentioned. But it's one thing to have, a kind of in the software world, to have a holy war over one particular thing it's important. But most users don't have the same opinion of importance that maybe I have about these details.
So which number is that? Which is the number that people are going to
density control limit calculation? Yeah.
Okay.
So it's,
and that's for only the non-standard transactions, or?
Yes. So it only applies to transactions that cannot be broadcast on the network. They have to be. You have to rent mining power. At the very least, you need to rent mining power. Or you need to own, thousands of dollars worth of mining power. And then you need to write some special software, construct some very special transactions. You need to have quite a bit of knowledge to create a specific contract that does just the right things to hit different limits, and then you need to plausibly claim in public that you're a victim of having your having that money either frozen or not frozen, depending on the result of this stakeholder what's being discussed. So and then there's also another side of it where there are people who also want those limits to be just very, very high. I'm afraid that it's almost certainly not going to happen because we've been just extremely conservative in this proposal. And at the very top of the rationale now is explaining why we would choose not to make them super high. It makes the worst case cost on the network about 243.9 times worse. It's just not, it's not a plausible direction for this particular chip. It is possible it's a plausible direction in the future, but it belongs in probably a future chip with a little bit more testing.
Yeah, that's really interesting because you said earlier something alluding to that as well too, which I wanted to dig into a bit more, that a lot of the work having been done now on the test frameworks and even having been through this whole process of analysis is that we're better positioned. So at the moment, we're just trying not to make things worse, but increasing the scope. But in the future, we could maybe do another one, which was kind of like, okay, well, if we were going to actually push the limits a bit more and we were happy to have a little give in the worst case scenario, then maybe we could expand the capacity even further, right? Yes. That's the idea?
Yeah, and actually, so the chip, if you check out the risk assessment for the chip, there is a section called expanded node safety performance safety margin, I think is what it's called. It's talking about the safety margin that we have right now, and it's trying to calculate what our actual safety margin for virtual machine performance is in the current network with the base assumption being from the chip's perspective that we want the nodes to be able to run on hardware that as old as at least 2017, which is a pretty reasonable time to target. That's when the Bitcoin Cash split happened. So and it talks about specifically, it has the calculations there for what our margin of safety probably is. And it's somewhere, depending on your hardware, it's somewhere between 10 and 100 times our current limits. So it's there. I mean, it's a significant margin of safety. It's nice to know that even if all of this other review weren't sufficient, our margin of safety is already high enough that we probably could actually raise the limits pretty significantly and have it not be a huge issue. Nevertheless, it is still maximally conservative to do the absolute minimum possible. It is always possible for a future chip to say, hey guys, specifically this one use case is prevented or by the limits or something like that, and we should just raise it a little bit to here. Here's the benchmarks. See, it's been 3 years now, and computers are now this much faster, and the block size hasn't significantly increased, and so our margin of safety is now X 100, right? And then we propose you raise the limits to get our margins of safety, until our margin of safety is back down to 100x. And let me also say specifically, when I say margin of safety, it means that on a consumer device, on a consumer desktop or something, if you run a Bitcoin Cash fully validating node, the worst case performance of the virtual machine itself should take somewhere between 1% and 10% of CPU utilization. That's what we mean by 10 to 100x safety margin. If we had a safety margin of 1, if there was no safety margin, then it would be 100% utilization. That would be bad. That would be very bad. We don't want that to happen. We want to be way below, so that it's just it needs to be so far below that there's not even an incentive to mess with it. And that's where we're at right now. Right now, and has always been that way since Satoshi added these limits and in July of 2010. Since then, and actually, because computers have gotten faster, the limits have actually, the safety margin has actually gone up massively since then. We should note, but just given where we are just right now, we can be pretty confident that consumer hardware can handle the worst case trash you can pack in either into non-standard or standard transactions. And so, yeah, we will resolve that number and finalize the chip. And I hope to hear statements from anybody listening. Please let me know. I'm around, and there's an AMA also on Reddit right now. So.
Yes, is that your phone making that ding sound periodically? I don't know if you can turn that off. It's happened a couple of times. But so when you say that the limits could potentially, thank you, with the limits were potentially being raised again, sort of in the future, once we have more data, that makes sense to me, but it does immediately make me think, oh, okay, are we in the future, potentially like an ABLA scenario, right? Where if hardware is always getting better, we don't want to be doing every 3 years, every 2 years, doing a fork to upgrade the VM limits if we could somehow automate it, right? I had never considered this before, but just what you were saying now brings that to my mind. Is that kind of where this is going?
Thank you. Thank you for the question, because I get to talk about the density stuff. No, the limits are based on essentially where in practice, what our limits right now are based on is a ton of different, first statically defined limits and how the virtual machine can be used. And then in practice, to figure out what the worst case performance of our network is in various modes, you have to specifically exhaustively review every possible contract construction, find the most abusive way to use it, and then pack it in the maximum density into both a standard and a non-standard transaction. And the answer is actually different based on the hardware you're running it on and some other things. So it's in general, the worst case stuff is almost always signature checking. And in 2020, we the Bitcoin Cash Network. I was not involved, but the Bitcoin Cash Network got signature checking kind of under control, and that work was incredibly important for making this possible, because that made this much more tractable. We only had to get under control a few other things, but then I describe all that because I wanted to give you a sense that it takes to even know where our performance is right now, where our worst case performance is right now, requires the kind of review that has taken more than a year. And in practice began in 2021. I mean, to get to here, we had to build tooling to like build the tooling to build the test vector set. I mean, it's been a very long road, and that is a fault of our limits being essentially very naively defined in the virtual machine itself. And that's partially a function of Satoshi had to sneak it in. And so he had to pick a way to sneak it in essentially a few lines, and in a way that he was pretty confident that he could just kind of measure it now, sneak it in, and then I think probably in the future, be able to upgrade it a little bit easier than if he had tried to do something a little bit more complex, like a density-based limit, where he was trying to balance the cost of different operations. He didn't try to balance anything. He was just totally fine with signature checking being far worse and hashing being close to far worse, but a little bit less than signature checking, and then everything else limited just absurdly low. So right now, contracts get limited at the chip describes this actually, but it's if you do the math, contracts get limited at less than 1% of the compute power that we allow malicious contracts to use, intentionally designed to be malicious contracts. And these new limits specifically keep the worst case standard transactions. It keeps them valid. It makes some stuff non-standard that we can prove beyond the shadow of a doubt cannot be plausibly non-malicious. It's actually the asymptotic limit of a plausibly non-malicious contract. It's hashing density, and that is it's 0.5. And there's a little proof written in easier to parse English, not in math, in the rationale. You can look at it, and it links to some stuff and has the numbers, but it's there is a limit that we can say is really a truly absolute worst case of what a plausibly non-malicious contract might be. And it's not literally possible to create a transaction that is, you know, plausibly non-malicious that even gets close to that. But in the hypothetical that, you know, transactions were perfectly efficient and it didn't have outputs and it didn't have overhead, then the asymptotic limit of that number is the hashing limit. So we've done stuff like that where we tried to definitively prove that all cases beyond here are within the current limit system, not even plausibly non-malicious, and we make those non-standard because then they actually hurt the worst case performance, and then the rest of the operations, which under Satoshi's statically defined system, are limited at 201 opcodes, no matter if they, you know, if you swap back and forth 201 times, you can do that an order of magnitude or two. Yeah, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah. It's just the balance of the current operations is just way out of whack. There are essentially a couple high peaks. There's some low stuff in the numbers area, and bitwise operations is a little higher depending on your implementation. That was another place where it was important to have both libauth and BCHN, so we could think about like the eternal properties of the protocol, not just how it works in C++ right now. You'll find all that stuff in the rationale and some of it in the risk assessment. We've tried to describe it in a way that is maximally reviewable. Obviously it's dense stuff, but it's written, I swear, just in English, and the footnotes should give you whatever calculation that is relevant. I hope we've done really well at demonstrating not just that, like, if I can say anything, it's like it's easy to assume that, like, okay, they just did a bunch of testing and picked some numbers that are good, and that is just not the approach at all. You start analytically, and you actually derive what the correct answer is. And then we simply validated it on multiple implementations, and there were a few things where we were a little bit surprised at the performance that we got in certain scenarios, especially with operation overhead and libauth and stuff, and those led to us reviewing that. Oh, actually, the time complexity of this one thing requires that we limit it better. And in the final version of the protocol of the proposal, the overall way of limiting sublinear and linear time operations is far more comprehensive, far more reliable, I would say, than previous proposals. It really is a great way to handle it, because it also handles. It gives us some defense in depth, a couple extra lines of defense if a particular implementation accidentally has a bug in the performance of one opcode. There are a few different barriers to that bug becoming an exploit. There's a barrier in that there is still like a density limit in how many operations you can actually get to execute. And then there's a density limit in the amount of input you can essentially give to those operations. And then there are, some of the higher level limits for the expensive operations that are greater than linear time complexity. But for the most part, a lot of the research that is relevant to the rationale, you can read through it and stuff. A lot of the research to that we've known for many years. Some of this stuff was well known in 2014, 2015, played into the block size wars, and people were coming up, proudly announcing a new clever way that they found to create linear time complexity in the VM. And those were all super helpful. We think that the VM has been very well reviewed now, and given our first again comprehensive review and deriving limits where we currently have them, and then these extra kind of barriers to extra layers of protection where we limit the density of input, we limit the density of operations, and then we have additional limits specifically on the most expensive operations. So yeah, I think we're in a very good spot safety wise. Okay. All of that before we talk about the 10 to 100x safety margin.
Yes.
And now I'm sorry, I remember we were talking about
Yes.
how much contract authors actually get. So contract authors right now are limited to 201 opcodes, and for an author, it's for contract author, it is pretty easy to accidentally hit that, unless you are essentially like byte by byte really optimizing stuff. You're doing stack juggling really well, and you're using maybe an automatic stack juggling optimizer, and you still, if you do a sufficiently complex contract, you have to break it up into different inputs, and now you're dealing with what we would call a multi-input state machine, and those are significantly more difficult to verify than a script. And so in practice, it is a big limit to contract development. That there are definitely teams that give up on certain product ideas because they're not reasonable to implement in the system. And so I want to say for the limits here, they are density based. They are based on essentially how much space you end up taking in the block. And that means that in a sense, they are linked to OBLA. We want to avoid increasing the scope in any way. And one good way to do that is leave the existing expectations in place, where the existing expectation is there is a worst case for a block, and we are not going to exceed it. And we can prove it'll never exceed it. And as the blocks get bigger, there is some chance. I would never say that we wouldn't want to raise the limits, but I will say that like the limits are very, very high. Every time you push add a single byte to your transaction input, you get around 100 times the average additional density that you got in our current system. It's 243 times, depending on if you're looking at the most malicious case or if you're looking at like a more typical case. But yeah, so contract authors in general, like at the minute as you're typing, when you get to your third opcode, you have more computation ability sort of
Space,
than you previously had. Well, for 10, it's definitely closer to 1,000. So 3, I don't want to give specific numbers until I don't want to be imprecise in the call. So look at the rationale if you want to know. Yes. But I'll say that normal contract authors, with the exception of some big int stuff, normal contract authors should almost never see the limits ever. It's just, if you're just like pushing some data and checking some signatures and moving some things around, you will simply not know that there are limits outside of our transaction limits, which are, themselves, they're limited by transaction fees. So, and we have avoided touching any of that as well. So in general, the kinds of contracts that people are using right now, absolutely nobody is going to be able to hit the limits unless they're intentionally trying. And there's only like 2 or 3 opcodes you have to use in order to get there. Because if you push enough data to try to hit the limits and then dupe it on the stack enough, you duplicate it on the stack enough, in the process of pushing it, you will have given yourself more limits than you'll be able to use by the end of the contract. So like it truly is absurd. It is difficult and requires a specific attempt to get to the limits right now. And it's still a little bit under where our current limits are for the most of for the rest of operations. So yeah, I will now clarify also, I do expect some people will hit the limits ultimately when they're doing things that were not possible at all before with larger numbers. And I should note that it's interesting and fantastic that Satoshi designed the numbers in our virtual machine to be specifically optimized for big integer manipulation. He chose specifically to use a big integer representation in order to minimize the sort of the in and out cost of doing big integer math. And so in practice, our virtual machine is extremely efficient to do big integer math. We could not ask for it to be better. Even if we had even if we added specific opcodes to do more complex sets of math, into the VM, they would not be that much faster than just using mul and div and add and stuff that are already in there, just because of that choice that Satoshi made. So we're in a fantastic spot there. Our contracts can actually have very close to what we would call bare metal performance, versus like if instead of having people write contracts that use math opcodes, if instead those people had proposed chips and made them all their own special opcode, and they had the most the fastest, best implementation in the C++ implementation, it would not be that much faster than writing it as a contract. So that's very cool, and it's a unique feature of exactly how Satoshi designed it. And it's one thing that a lot of contract devs and people have been getting so excited about this year and leading up to this.
Yeah, so talk to me about the big ints then. We sort of touched on that, I believe, briefly in the previous one, but that was still a bit more up in the air as to whether people would get on board with it. It seemed to be coming late in the process, even though it was kind of a sub element of the previous chip, but things have changed significantly there. Give me the update on where we're at with that.
And to be clear, we would prefer for chips to be done and proposed, and not surprising at all, more than 12 months before the upgrade. So there's definitely a question. We want to make sure that all stakeholders are excited about it. And so I'll say background wise. Of course, the limits chip has been in long development. It really kicked into high gear in February with BCHN, and then has continued throughout the year. As I was talking about before, the verifying not only that this upgrade is safe and a good idea right now, but also looking forward, where does this upgrade leave us if we need to increase the stack item length, which is important for post-quantum crypto, right? Well, not right, but I don't mean to assume that people would know that. But increasing the stack item length is probably important for post-quantum crypto. The increasing contract lengths, increasing VM number lengths, increasing density, decreasing density. There's a few other things. One of the things that was a subset of the things that we needed to verify for future compatibility, to make sure that we weren't setting ourselves up for technical debt in the future, and that we were maximizing, keeping as many doors open if future chips identify that, like, hey, there are these use cases that we didn't fully realize about, and we need to have the limits just go crazy over here because it's super important. We've tried to really think through the scenarios, and you can find in the rationale. You can even search in the rationale future if you want to just see the however many it is, 20 some references, and the risk assessment also. But one of the things we needed to verify was, okay, so with these limits, where do we stand on the math question? Because it's been a long open question for a lot of contract developers, that in 2022, I published an example of a DEX written directly for Bitcoin Cash tokens, called JetX, Joint Execution Decentralized Exchange. It's just a decentralized exchange that has a little bit of a different execution method to minimize the miner extractable value and try to essentially minimize the tax that's extracted from the validation on other networks when miners can reorder people's transactions, and so they stick their own purchase right before your sell and then put their own sell back to you or whatever. I wanted to give an example of it. I'll note that example is almost complete. It has the market maker covenant has a description of its behavior, but it has this section where it's like, and here you do emulated precision math. and there are a lot of contracts that are like that in various products that people are working on for Bitcoin Cash, that where people have really been slowed down or stopped fully by how difficult it is to get higher precision calculations. Even though from the perspective of the network, a higher precision calculation is almost an irrelevant cost. We are allowing malicious contracts to use actually hundreds of times more computing power than it would cost to let honest users use higher precision emulation, high precision math. So that that limit has been something that's been a problem for kind of a problem for contract developers for a long time. In 2022, we raised it from 4 to 8, but it was there was a lot of uncertainty, and I will say I was simply wrong in 2021 and 2022 about Big Int. Not that we did need to figure out the limits in order to do Big Int, but I also thought that it was just not going to be possible to do Big Int like this, and that's just we just needed to have all of these other things, the other prerequisites lined up, where we have the tooling to build the tooling, to build the test vectors, and really confirm that, like, oh wow, doing math at that length of input is even in our VM context is not really significant difference in performance than any of the other operations. And so we based on the time complexity of some of the more mul, mod, and div, they are limited a little bit more. But it turns out that when you are able to get the kind of the limits to a sensible place, it is very easy to go ahead and instead of raising the max num size, and depending on your implementation, it's either max num size is a limit, or in BCHN it has been in 2022 was optimized to use the fastest possible 8-byte math. And so in practice, there is a real implementation cost to adding a Big Int implementation. However, academia and much of the business world has been using big integer arithmetic for many, many, many years, and the library that BCHN chose to implement there is very rock solid. And we've got, we're testing against OpenSSL, we're testing against a separate Python-based implementation, we're testing against a separate JavaScript V8's implementation. We're testing against actually a self-inspecting tests that are called property-based testing. A really great testing suite was developed by an anonymous contributor to use the opcodes themselves to test the formal properties of how math should work, and it randomly tries millions of combinations, and we can run it for as long as we want and verify that this is Big Int math. It works exactly as we expect it to at any size bytes you give it. So I think we're extremely confident in the implementation part. And what is notable, and the reason I made a judgment call to split off the Big Int chip rather than try to say it's just one of the limits, because it is, while it is technically one of the limits, and we do not need it anymore, it is completely obviated. What matters is not the technical scope necessarily. What matters for a chip is the scope that people thought the chip started with. And so even if I believe that the limit system is one thing, and like all of the limits are under consideration if we're trying to fix the limits, I thought that the best course of action that was maximally transparent and hopefully would give people the most time to think about it and look at it, was to break it out as a separate chip and try to do just a separate process just for it. I recognize that it is, in that case, 2 months late. If it's just its own proposal, it is 2 months late, and we need to be careful about creating a precedent for upgrades that are not essentially boring. The chip process is about producing boring upgrades that are the highest quality we can possibly get, and then getting really good consensus on it in kind of the least sweat and tears option. And human consensus is hard; it's always hard. But a boring and expected upgrade process is the way to do it. And so I I split it off separately. I did not want it to stop the limits chip, but it was important that we test the limits chip with it. And so we had to get to a nearly production ready implementation. And it was two different implementations that were working on it. And so, I made the judgment call, and some people will disagree and think that I should have put it in the limits chip, or that I shouldn't have proposed it at all because it's just too late. And I decided that I would just try to get it out there and see how people see what people think about it, even though it is 2 months late. It was released 10 months. It was published 10 months before the proposed upgrade. I'm cautious. I'm cautiously optimistic that right now it doesn't have any negative technical feedback. It is it's concerns about precedent. We don't want to create a precedent that a chip can just show up out of nowhere. And so it has to be super clear that this chip truly is downstream of the limits chip, and there is truly something that's just exceptional about it. And I'm sorry for that. If I had realized 2 months earlier that not only is it possible, but it was going to be truly achievable by this deadline, then for sure I would have been like, hey guys, we should do this, and then there would be no concerns at all on the table. But I fully recognize and take responsibility for that being 2 months later than it should be. And I'm going to leave it to the process now. It is in kind of the final lap. It is the chip process. We're looking for final reviews and final statements. If the consensus isn't clearly there, I will be the first to remove my own support. But I'm not concerned at all about it on a technical level. And I think that it would be amazing for Bitcoin Cash to get it in 2025 rather than waiting 22 months from the proposal, right? So it is a kind of a hard choice. It's just a hard choice. Do we do it 10 months later, or do we say that no matter what, it stops at 12 months? And good, well-meaning people can fall on either side. And so I'm going to be real ginger with it this month. I want to see what other stakeholders say. For the most part, so far, most of the stakeholders that are really deeply involved are either people who saw it right away and they've been part of testing it, or they're contract devs who are just like, get this to us yesterday. So, I mean, I want to be super clear that and I probably will try to make it even clearer in the chip that I recognize this is an exception, and that it should not be a norm, but that I'm simply asking the community to make an exception this time because it is downstream of the limits work. And to be clear, to be super clear, the big int chip is quite literally one sentence. It is to remove n max num size. And in BCHN, that requires adding a big num implementation. In libauth, it requires nothing because libauth had to use big nums under the surface anyways. JavaScript implementation need a big number implementation just to do our VM right now. And for other implementations, it's they either have built-in programming language primitives or libraries. Almost all of them have built-in primitives these days. But C++ is both the hardest one and the concern because it is our mining ecosystem. It's not to be taken lightly. But I will try to even clarify more, and I've been working with stakeholders in the past few days, clarify even more in the chip that if it goes through, we should be real clear in the future that this is something that is literally downstream of something that started in 2021. It is not new. There have been 2 or 3 chips proposed since then to do things with math to try to get this feature to contract developers. There were chips last year and chips the year before, and of course the 2022 one where we actually did raise the limit. And following this limits upgrade, if it goes through, that limit is simply not necessary at all anymore. And it's actually, when a limit becomes not necessary, it's a good idea to pull it out then, for overall protocol simplicity. So I did weigh it quite a bit before daring to say, like, hey guys, I think maybe it's a good idea to do this year, even though I'm 2 months late. And I'm sorry, but let's, it would be fantastic if we could test this really well, even if it doesn't go in until 2026, because testing it is just part of verifying that we really got limits right. And so that work happened. We tested it really, really well with the limits chip. We are certain that the performance, the performance qualities are what we would expect from time complexity analysis. And we verified the actual implementations against all these other versions. I think we're in a good spot technically, but this is obviously where the final lap begins, and I will honestly defer if it does seem like there is concern about precedent, because I think that's the primary concern is precedent for our process, and it's important that we maintain our system of organized revolutions.
Yes.
Because human consensus is very hard, and it is easy to mess up. And when you mess it up, it's very hard to fix. So we're in a very good spot right now, and I would not want to jeopardize that. If it does come down to it, if people have good disapproval statements, then I will add mine to it. But for now, I am cautiously optimistic that it certainly can happen technically, and that we can differentiate sufficiently. That this is it's just weird. It's not like Bitcoin Cash is going to change its limits maybe ever again. They would be density based now. And with block size automatically updating, there's really not many knobs to touch anymore. And we did not pick any new numbers. That's all derived. There are really not many opinions encoded in these specifications. They are just what is existing right there and giving that ability to contract authors.
Yeah. I mean, I think, like you say, we're certainly at a really good point. It occurred to me as I was thinking about this topic that if you draw from August 1st, 2017 with the BTC split, and then up until November of the 2020 with the XEC split, we're at just about, or I think even past the point now where the period of no splits has now exceeded more than 50%, of that time, right? So
right.
It
doesn't
very
feel
long.
I believe
That's right.
Sure. That's funny.
Yeah, once you actually sit and think about the maths, I feel like maybe we need to start doing some promoting or something about that, because that's quite a statistic. Once you think about it, it really doesn't feel that way, but it is, and that's obviously a ball we want to keep rolling, right? So that gives me two sides to the coin there, because on one hand, I kind of think, well, things are going well, so when you're winning, win more, right? Like that means there should be a bit of give, because everybody's not traumatized. If a split had happened yesterday, there would be a lot more like, well, let's not fuck around with this. We just want to establish things. But on the other hand, you also don't want to, sink a floating ship, right? So I think for sure.
And human consensus processes are really delicate. A good quote there is, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. Like, yes, human institutions are just inherently really hard to make uncorruptible. And we in many cases, even the ones that people thought were pretty uncorruptible have been, obviously corrupted in many ways. So there is no substitute for eternal vigilance, and norms are incredibly important. So there is definitely and it was a little bit of it was a little bit of a challenge to decide whether or not like, wow, okay, we actually can make this happen this year. We have this is the earliest we've ever had 2 implementations for something like this. And do we do it in 10 months or do we do it in 22 months? that was a challenge. So yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic. I do not want to hurt our consensus norms though. So if it comes to that, then we've done the testing we needed to do. So I'm very confident that the limits chip is where it needs to be as well.
The other side of the coin, of course, is the opportunity cost of not doing the chip. Like you said, that extra 12 months. And I think to that end, people need to get a bit of a sense as to how important or how much payoff there could be of having those 12 months, which is of course compounding, right? If we get more devs into our ecosystem, let's say May next year, or even after November, with the potential to play around on ChipNet, and then that snowballs from there, versus having to wait another 12 months before we can announce this and people are still being limited and mess around. So I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to that, and B, also to, you mentioned quantum crypto, like what are the different elements that are the different apps, I guess, or ideas, or even some concrete examples, existing teams in the ecosystem that are going to benefit from this change? Yeah.
I wanted to say, and then your first point there, 100% agree. And it is just so important to recognize that, bear markets are for building. Not very much work gets done during bull markets. And if there's a bull market next year, like who knows what we can make happen if there's just a huge influx to the space. So, it is not a trivial decision to, decide whether or not to go through with a particular proposal. In this case, there are certainly compounding returns. There are, our contract devs that are actively blocked on the numbers issue, on just emulating precision enough to be able to calculate the price of a cash token if you have more than a few thousand BCH or something in a pool, and that is a real limit on different automated market maker designs. So it freezes out actual development. It means that, those teams simply won't build that product. Worse so, another consideration before I got the courage to tell everybody, like, yo guys, I think we really actually can we can ship this cycle that it is truly done. I know it's 2 months late, but if there's a consideration that if I say that, all the dev teams who are working on shipping a product right now that do emulated precision, and they were working, if they're working on it on a contract audit, like the cost is non-zero just to say that, because they're going to drop it, like they might drop it. So that really weighed on me a lot, and I wanted to make absolutely certain that I was sure before I possibly, bombed that work. Because that's what happens. If they're like, hey, I'm working on this library and it's going to make, emulated precision work a lot easier, and it's going to, they see big int chip, done, sweet, I'm going to work on something else. So that was a real consideration. So I'm sorry, I take full responsibility for being 2 months late there. I hope to be forgiven. But there are considerations beyond just like, hey, I want to get this in public. I wanted to be 100% sure that we could have production ready in BCHN, in other implementations, in every active implementation, before telling too many of those contract developers that I was really thinking about it. So that verification simply took me 2 months longer than I would have hoped. But sorry, you're all the way to the all the way to the question of, where does this leave us? So, it's a longstanding issue to be able to do higher precision math, and first off, automated market makers. There's all sorts of different contract systems that you see on Ethereum and other ecosystems. Things like collateralized loan systems and decentralized stablecoins and different kinds of automated market maker systems that have different properties, like where they balance between two similarly priced assets, and then market makers that are sort of optimized for meme things, optimized for fast movement. There's stuff for prediction markets, a number of those kinds of use cases. I would say another element of this upgrade is, of course, for developers, for the limits upgrade is being able to get past the 201 opcode limit. That's huge for some subset of developers who, when they hit those limits, they have a couple options. They can try to optimize it a little bit, but there are limits. And when you fully optimized it, if you still are over the limit, you now make the choice about whether you want to triple or quadruple the complexity of your overall system by having to develop a multi-input wallet system that needs to now pull UTXOs from multiple places. And it just spirals the complexity of your setup. And in practice, dev teams do abandon projects based on the cost of development. And that's a development cost issue. The other thing I did mention earlier is the stack size stuff. There are a number of I don't want to overpromise here. There are a number of newer cryptography things that you can do with, obviously, math. And if we don't have the limits on our math, and if our contracts have surprisingly high limits based on what we currently have, just letting contract authors use the limits that we give to malicious contracts right now, so we know that they're safe because otherwise they've not been exploited right now. So the allowing contract authors to use those limits for higher precision math means that a lot of new cryptographic primitives are in bounds. Things that you can try newer things. There's obviously quantum resistant crypto. There are zero knowledge proof systems of various constructions. There's homomorphic encryption. There's a number of what we would call just new cryptography that is not necessarily widely thought to be 100% safe. Right? We believe SHA-256 is 100% safe because we base our mining on it. Like, if it's not safe, something's very wrong, right? So we can be confident in SHA-256. We can also be confident in our signature scheme. We can't necessarily be confident in some of these other systems. There are formal proofs that they are safe, but then there are times when what we thought had formal proofs of safety that they were not. They had incorrect assumptions, or they were simply wrong, or whatever. Most of the time they're not simply wrong. There's an assumption issue, but there's just some uncertainty about newer cryptographic primitives, and so something that's very cool about having a big int manipulation in contract land is that people can experiment with this stuff, and it's not the network's problem. Like, the network can do fine, like, letting you do quite a bit of postmodern cryptography, and the only person who takes any risk when you do that is you, and only up to the amount of BCH that you send the contract. So yeah, I mean, there's just like it is. I think it is pretty big to be moving in that direction, and I don't want to overpromise. It's one thing to say have it be possible, and then another thing for university teams to choose Bitcoin Cash as the first place they try to do something. But I do think that there is a future in which that happens, because Bitcoin Cash, again, has very low transaction fees, layer one, censorship resistant, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, and it's a very, very popular ecosystem. It has a lot of wallets, a lot of companies. There's a lot that might attract new developers from a totally different place than are currently working on contracts on Bitcoin Cash.
Yes. I mean, one thing I have been meditating on, and I said it before on the show, is that I hadn't considered, like you said, that bull markets on where stuff doesn't get built. So that's actually quite a compelling argument, I think. But if you just ship it in there, it's ready when the hype arrives. Like the hype arrives, and whether you're ready or not. And ideally, you want to be ready because then you benefit so much more. Versus if you're not, I hadn't considered that as an argument, but I'm already somewhat predisposed to it because in my mind, the chip process is about preventing splits, and we've already got to a point that everybody agrees that we want the big number stuff. And it's just a question of, firstly, is it that technically, something that's been missed and maybe there hasn't been enough time to cook on that. And then secondly, worries about the credibility in the rest of the crypto scene. Now, for both of those, I feel like we're already on a good track somewhat, because if there is a technical issue, if there's a technical issue and everybody wanted the thing in the first place, it's easy to fix because everybody just goes, this is an issue, let's fix it, right? If you can get consensus on the thing, you can get consensus on the fix. The problem is when you can't get consensus on the thing, but it gets in anyway, like inscriptions on BTC, and then you can't get consensus on the fix either. It's like a vicious circle, But the other aspect with the credibility, I'm also not super worried about, because this is maybe going to be the last little period of time where BCH is a bit off the radar of the rest of crypto. We're getting more eyes, we're getting more traction, but it hasn't really arrived in earnest that people are keeping a close eye on what's going on in BCH. So if we're going to take somewhat of a risk or a chance or do something a bit unorthodox, I think now is a pretty excellent time to do it, because if in 2 years or even in 1 year, maybe by the time people are really starting to get, hey, what's going on here? That would be a less good time to be doing something a bit non-standard like this, I'd say.
Yeah, 100% agree. It definitely needs to be appreciated that again, bear markets are for building. Like, it is hard to stress just how little gets done when the price is rocketing up. Nobody is shipping, and in part, like, companies don't want to rock the boat. If they've got a great product working, it's getting new users coming in, they are making sure support is good, they're fixing bugs, they're not developing new products. That is not product development time. When the door is on fire because people are coming in so fast, you are not thinking of new ways to bring people in. You are working on keeping your company growing and, not blowing up your costs too much while the markets are rising, et cetera, et cetera. So, bear markets should not be squandered. And that's definitely, that is the thing that made me consider, like, wow, we really probably should try to ship this year, and just see what people how people will, if people will accept it, I think that there is a very good chance that over the next few years, it could become harder for a number of reasons, like geopolitical, also, like, global recession, changes in global politics. Things can change very, very quickly. You may be surprised as to how quickly various geographic locations turn against crypto all of a sudden, and then vice versa. They flip back the other way. We hear constantly over the course of the history of Bitcoin, we've heard of various countries ban Bitcoin and unban Bitcoin and ban Bitcoin. So, like, do not waste the time you have. If you have something that you believe truly is ready, I'm not going to, I don't want to push it. I don't want to push it too hard, obviously, because I do not want to stress like the community goodwill that is here right now. But yeah, I think it would be a big win, and I hope that people will review it with that in mind. And yeah, compounding returns are very important. It is hard for there's lots of quotes about how difficult it is for humans to comprehend compounding returns, but the difference between 10 months and 22 months is big.
It's enormous.
And in crypto, crypto moves at like 5-10% at random days. Like 22 months of change is a big change. It could be nowhere. We could be flat in 22 months or whatever, or the world could look entirely different. World geopolitics, the crypto world itself, Bitcoin Cash's space in the world. It's I don't take any of it lightly. It's definitely something to be soberly considered.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it would give me a bit of a run through then. Is the plan just the same as we were talking about for VM limits? October 1st, it's all done. Start getting stakeholder stuff, assess kind of by the end of October, start of November, if everybody's kind of on board, and then by lock-in date, it's clear which way the coin has fallen. That's the game plan, right?
Yeah, basically, I'd say that. For Big Int specifically, again, it is the specification. We will probably finalize the chip and includes maybe some more cost and risk, and maybe do a formal risk assessment that is as extensive as the VM limits, but the technical specification remains the sentence. It is that one sentence. The nmax num size is removed, and there's a rationale describing why it doesn't make sense for us to add more to the technical specification, because some implementations simply don't. It's actually just a limit they're going to delete, and in the original Satoshi implementation, it was a limit they're going to delete. And really, just in the C++ implementations, is it something that is genuinely hard to implement? It's not. They don't have a built-in primitive that is considered super safe, and so it takes a lot of work to get there. And so I wanted to describe that, is that you said when it will finalize. In that respect, there is going to be some, maybe there'll be some more explanation, and then when these AMAs are done and stuff, I'll try to get anything that was a question that we want to get in there. We want to make sure it's in there and finalize it. But like the technical specification was final the very first day, and it was, with the sober understanding that the moment
after it was changed from 258, right? It was going to be 258.
Right. Yeah, sorry.
No limit.
Yeah. Some of the early stakeholders we were talking about, like, okay, if it seems super important that we try to get this year, will people feel more safe with just raising the limit? And yeah, there was some, I had some uncertainty there also, but it has developed to, and after review and several people saying like, no, like if there's no reason to have the limit, we should just remove it now. And that is a very compelling argument. We don't want to just raise the limit, because then it's a problem later. So yes. You're right. I'm sorry that one line has changed. It changed from setting it to 258 to removing it. So I'm so sorry. Yeah. And I guess that happened a month later or so or something. But so that will finalize by October 1st, according to the process. I mean, I'm going to try to follow it as best as I can, and just ask people to review it, and if they have concerns, just whether technical or process, I want to get them recorded, and if it does seem like it's going to be a real issue, then I 100% will withdraw my own support and recommend that other people withdraw their support, and I'll propose it for 2026 instead.
Yeah.
But we'll see. But yeah, I don't want to.
Don't want to hype it too much.
I don't want to do it by saying things like that. But as long as people understand, as long as people understand when I say that, I am not at all worried about the technical part. First off, the review has been amazing already. The review was very good months ago, and now it has increased in levels. It is certainly the best tested part of our code base now because of the property-based testing suite and multi version programming that we're doing around testing different ways, confirming that every single implementation of big integer out there agrees with BCHN's implementation specifically, and then of course combinatorial test vectors that are part of the set that is for VM limits. I think we're in a very good place technically there. And then again, even there are all those other protections where we have density level protections. We've got existing things derived from the existing limits level protections. We've got the 10 to 100x safety margin, and then we also have 6 months of ChipNet deployment. Like, it's something that's been fantastic with the chip process is getting to a resolution on November 15th. And having ChipNet so people can start developing products on it. Also don't discount how good that is for helping the rest of the ecosystem get ready for an upgrade. So even if we think, even if we're totally sure that BCHN is ready and that the other node implementations that are in consensus at that time are ready, whatever their latest software versions are. Even then, there's a lot of companies that do have to upgrade their systems in various ways. If they have some internal patched version of some node, then they need to implement it as well. And ChipNet gives us 6 months to make that happen. It's something that we never got something like that before on Bitcoin, not until I guess 2022 or whenever 2023. But so there are a number of protections that make me much more confident in the technical part of it. But there is there's a sober reality to consider with do we feel like it would create a precedent for things to be moved too quickly? And if so, I don't want to do that myself. I'm gonna. It is a hard place to be in. I mean, it's a hard decision to make, and I'm sorry I'm making people make it.
I know I
think it's important. Yeah.
Sorry for doing too much good work too fast.
It is something I thought about hard before making it too public, because again, it just cuts the legs out of people who are doing great work and that makes math easier in the interim. Like, we can technically deploy emulated precision math right now, but it's very expensive to develop and audit for security contracts that use that. And so, I mean, to maybe explain a little bit further, it would have been doubly worse if I was not 100% sure that it could happen before making it more widely known that I thought it could be really truly done, production done, with plenty of time before November. And so it's sorry about that. I hope that people will review it on technical merits, and then also if you do have really strong opinions about our social infrastructure, please help us.
We can hash that out in the community as well too. That's still an ongoing discussion that everyone needs to have. And to that point, can you talk a little bit about one thing that I have noticed, especially with this, is that the BCH network effect, when we're talking about coming into a new year and the compounding effect and so forth, is really starting to happen, because over this last couple of months, the surge in interest and help for this project has been massive in a way that would not have happened, I don't think, 2 years ago, certainly not 4 years ago, right?
Yeah, it feels good.
If there's anyone you want to give, any extra credit to or discussion of how that all has come about to help you get things over the line, because I think that's increasingly what we'll hopefully see in the BCH community as a result of everyone being aligned and working with these strong processes.
Yeah. I'm scared that I'll miss people, but I for sure, big shout out to BCHN and to Callan, who has been the MVP on the implementation side for sure, and then also to an anonymous contributor who has done some very intense testing in the past. Specifically for Big Int in the past few months. But then, for limits, like it is very, that list is going to be very long. And I'm almost a little scared to like when I finalize the chip to put the acknowledgement section together, because I'm afraid I am going to miss some people, but I'm going to make sure I go through and try to get everybody. But contract devs that have been pushing for this for years. Honestly, I was not in January. I was not planning on trying to complete limits this year, and there were definitely some contract devs that were like, "We need this year, Jason, do this." it's like you're gonna make me do it. So my development schedule is ruined for the year, but it's okay. It's hopefully it was worth it. And I'm sorry to chain graph people. I got a bug to fix over there. I've not touched since March. There's some stuff to catch up on after November and a long vacation, but we'll see.
Absolutely. Okay. I think we've covered basically all of that stuff that we needed to, and we have time for maybe one or two other quick little things to sneak in there. One thing people have been talking about a little bit has been double spend proofs has come back up on people's radar very interestingly. And I think this is basically because the scalability of BCH is now looking in a good spot. Programmability is looking in a good spot between cash tokens and now obviously the VM limits and the big ints stuff. So speed is now kind of winding its way back into the mind of the community as what do we need to fix or upgrade. Just wondering if you had any thoughts about either the adoption of double spend proofs or also ZCEs, right? Is one of your things and might be impacted by these changes. Is that going to help us get over the line with exchanges being more willing to accept zero conf and stuff like that? Where's all that at? I'll say I'm extremely excited about ZCs. It's zero confirmation escrows. This is in the pieces of the ZC proposal from 2021. The pieces of the ZC proposal are, by our standards, ancient. Like the first proposals probably were on the early Bitcoin forums. And surely at least 2011 or 2012. Then there were some formal papers in 2015. Then some people from Bitcoin Unlimited were working on it in 2019 or so. I ruminated on it or so from 2019 to 2021 with colleagues at BitPay. I worked at BitPay from 2013 to 2019. Gave me a perspective of how merchants think about payments, obviously. And so, it was something I was very steeped in. And to be very, very honest, like the double spend, the concern of zero conf transactions is very real. Like most merchants do not have the time or resources to dedicate to like creating a special risk system just for Bitcoin Cash. So that's what Bitcoin Cash people really need to like deeply understand, that Bitcoin Cash competes with everything. You compete with all the traditional fiat currencies. You could compete with other cryptocurrencies. In many cases, cryptocurrencies that are not even meaningfully decentralized. They're like run by a foundation. They have like a VC backing. They're like three guys in a house. You can like
like you can arrest the entire cryptocurrency, right? I mean, like they're not censorship resistant for sure. And many of them are the ones that you are competing with on payments. So you have to understand that like you need to be truly competitive. And if merchants aren't getting on board with zero confirmation payments because there is such an effort to have a specific risk system, and more directly, there's also there's a systemic risk of zero confirmation payments. If the instantaneous value of all zero confirmation payments reaches a certain amount, there's an incentive for fraud as a service mining, and we don't want that to happen. Like it would be great if zero confirmation payments are sort of like the friend to friend payment strategy, because nobody's going to double spend a friend or a repeated business contact, but there is an actual need. There is a real need for low trust payments, and so the zero. I am very excited about zero confirmation escrows. And sorry, I know this is going to be I should focus on the chips at hand, but I do plan on picking up ZCEs again. If I can just explain the scenario, you go to a Bitcoin Cash meetup at a bar or something, and you're onboarding somebody, and you're like, hey, so you've never used this before? Okay, cool. Here, download this wallet, and let me send you $10. And your wallet sends them a transaction that has the $10 payment, and then what's called a ZCE output, a zero confirmation escrow output, which is essentially a promise to everybody, including the network, the miners, everybody, that you will not try to double spend this transaction. And then they can take the $10 they just got in their wallet. There's no locking period or anything like that. There's no setup, and they can immediately spend $5 of it to buy a drink. That's the use case. And the merchant can know that the $5 they just got has the finality of a 1 confirmation, and in some cases a 10 confirmation transaction, because fundamentally that first transaction that you gave them has a $10 output on it, and a $10 here and $10 here. And if you try to double spend this transaction in the next 5 seconds, the network will see and will confiscate the money from this output and give it to whichever miner gets the lock. And then the merchant still gets their money, and you just lose $20. That's all. So in the case that you don't double spend it, that $10 is immediately back in your wallet. You can spend it immediately as a zero conf payment. You simply can't use it as another zero conf bounty until the next confirmation, in which case a miner can be confident that, in which case a merchant can be confident that the first one has already been mined. And if the value is less than the block, then they can go ahead and mine it, and they can go ahead and accept this ZC. Yeah. So there's some details on the chip, but like fundamentally, you don't have to understand too much about the various edge cases. If you get the sense that the goal is to get to a payment that a merchant can truly trust is actually going to stay, like they get the payment and they actually don't have to monitor the chain at all. Because if it's a ZCE payment, even if you do try to double spend it, first the whole chain will broadcast your transaction for a few seconds to revoke it back. And then after about 5 seconds, as a matter of as a logistical detail, the chain should not continue to try to forward your transaction, because that would actually help to an attacker to mess with zero confirmation output. So it's very strictly limited to that 5 seconds. And then, however, even if you do try to like secretly sneak your transaction to a mining fraud as a service miner, the miner has a greater incentive to stab you in the back and take the money anyways, and give the merchant the money they expected they were going to get, and
maximize their own payout from the bounty.
That's right. And because the bounty is equal to the payment, you cannot have an incentive to pay the miner $11 to take this money back, unless so there. And the chip specifically discusses there are some the actual risk model for merchants, and it's just significantly better than something that is essentially sort of random chance-based risk with a systemic risk total amount. So yeah, I think that it really hits our use case, the design brief, if we're trying to optimize that welcome to Bitcoin Cash experience, and being able to instantly pay in a in-person scenario where, for example, for whatever reason, you don't have an ongoing relationship with that merchant, or they don't have a good way of like finding you if it becomes fraudulent. And yeah, but we got to understand that like we are competing with other payment methods, and even if we can say that like, yeah, technically zero confirmation transactions are slightly lower risk than credit cards, like, no, you need it to be like 1,000 times lower risk, or effectively zero, if you want it to be worth their time. Because when it's just getting started, like any product that you're trying to get people to switch to, you need to be 10 times better for it to be worth switching. So
Yeah.
that's easy.
That's assuming you had all the customer base and everything. BCH is already in a disadvantage in several ways, so we cannot afford to have any gaps in the pitch, basically.
Yes.
Yeah. What about with like exchanges and so forth? Let's not worry about merchants for a second. What about exchanges or other parts of the ecosystem? I'm trying to think what else would be on people's minds, like maybe some kind of even like cross-chain bridges or things like that.
Yeah.
Would that make a difference there?
Yeah, and digital purchases, just digital purchases too. Like depending on how revocable the digital purchase is, some of them are really truly limited by zero conf. So for many of them, if you are, for example, selling VPN services, you can give somebody a token for the service based on the payment, and if it doesn't go through, you just revoke it. However, that is not a sufficient solution for us as a network. We need to understand that what we're actually saying there is that no VPN provider will integrate Bitcoin Cash unless they really, really care about it. Because creating a special revocation path, even though they already do that with credit cards, they have these processes, but still, we are the new guy, and it is. It is very hard to get on a development schedule for a company if you are just a little better. You need to be like way better for it to be worth it. And when they've done the implementation, when they've done the integration, it needs to work forever. It needs to never break. Needs to never bother them. And that happened a lot in 2015. I mean, the thing that really set Bitcoin back was huge cost of the entire merchant base that was really truly using it for active commerce. All of a sudden, their customers were paying like $30 transaction fees, and worse, some of those customers were they had a payment issue with their wallet or something like that, and now they underpaid or they overpaid or something, and now you need to send them their money back. You want to, if you want to give them a refund, you got to pay $30 to send it back to them. And so like you've got not only, you need to have 1,000 great customers where the purchase works perfectly for it to outweigh that one customer that's like, hey, you stole $60 from me. That's a big deal. And so, and that from 2015 to 2017 and onward, and that's the reason BTC adoption, kind of stopped there. If you have those bad customer experiences, and then the merchants see that that's a bad customer experience, like, hey, y'all, this is not even worth us working on as a company. Like this is not worth our time. This one payment method takes up half of all of our support, and it accounts for less than 1% of our payments. And for that kind of, you got to recognize that we are always, if you want to be taken up as an alternative, you need to be just that much better. And it has to be reliably better. You have to always and reliably be better. And merchants, like it or not, most merchants are not going to do super special stuff unless they can be completely sure it's better than anything they're done, better than any other alternative. So I think even ZCEs, even though we can promise, within 10 seconds, I can send you some money and you can pay for your beer, and the merchant can be completely sure that they're going to get that money. Even that, it's still a technical hurdle to get to there, but it's certainly better than what our current offerings if you're dealing with low trust payment situations. And so that's the idea. It's a low trust over the internet, especially, but also in person, depending on rule of law in the area or whatever. Internet payments. I think exchanges are a good candidate for early adoption for CCEs because and especially depending on risk models or whatever. If you put a multi-$1,000 commitment that you're not going to double spend this, and then you send them a few $1,000s worth of Bitcoin Cash in the output, you get that money back immediately back to your wallet. Your wallet did not lose that other money. It's not like locked up or anything. It's only taken if you specifically write software to abuse it. And in practice, very few ZCs are ever going to be confiscated. It's something where we'll have to kind of test it every 10 blocks or something like that, and have a website that's these all got confiscated, so we know ZCs are working. But in practice, everybody's going to know that it doesn't work to double spend a ZCE, and so you won't see it. And that's actually what matters. It's just to create to set the incentives and the game theory right to ensure that there is a strategy for instant finality. And the cost is the time value of waiting for that second output to confirm before you get to make another ZCE payment. And then, of course, note, there's no getting around that you can only send half of all of your money at any one time with instant finality. But honestly, I think that's a pretty good trade-off. Very few people are emptying their entire, wallet or their entire savings on one single transaction, and especially in a simple. If
they know that this is there, they can just have a bit extra to make sure it's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of people walk around with 50 or 100. And if you're in the U.S., $50 or $100 in their wallet or something, and your average transaction is 20, right? So I think it's a pretty reasonable expectation that we can think that that we can make good product experiences that use the instant finality and kind of just blend right in into the wallet and get us to where we can truly say that one thing I think is very cool specifically about ZCEs is if a merchant, if the receiver is listening on the network before they receive the ZCE and then they receive a ZCE directly from you, if they then go broadcast it and they know they're connected to some nodes, they can actually accept it immediately. It's actually technically faster than the credit card systems, because for the merchant, they have to ask the credit card company and get the answer back. And for ZCEs, it is one directional. It is based on the actual the game theory. When you get the ZCE, when you have it in hand, without beyond the shadow of a doubt, that if you broadcast this in the next 5 seconds, the entire network will help you rebroadcast it to a miner who will defect if the user who's paying you tries to double spend you. So
it's that 2 seconds of the credit card loading thing that you see on the payment terminals, that would be gone. Yeah. Yeah.
So, it is technically possible to have, so ping times are a problem in payments. The time from when the terminal gets the payment and and actually in credit cards, they ask a bank and they ask the other bank. And sometimes, sometimes it's not direct. And so, we actually have a solution that can have literally lower latency than the trusted card systems, because it uses a trustless solution, which is pretty cool. There are a few solutions that fit that design brief so perfectly. I'm very excited about that in the hopefully in the next year or two. It is I'll say from a technical perspective, it has been possible to do ZCs since 2021, and I've been busy, but some of the early feedback in that chip process was so worried about that 5 seconds where, that sounds like RBF. Like if I get a ZC and we replace zero conf transactions for that 5 seconds, like we're no better than RBF, but like that is not the same. 5 seconds is less than the guarantee of what people should already be waiting for a zero conf transaction. You need to listen for a second or two. And in practice, 5 is the safe number that BU in their testing determined. And so that's what the chip said, for earlier testing on another topic. But yeah, so that ZCs in general were certainly people on one hand, people were like, "There's no way that's a real solution. Has it really been that simple all this time?" Because it's something that we had been talking about for a decade, and it did take fitting together some puzzle pieces that became possible on Bitcoin Cash. It took fitting together some puzzle pieces that kind of were resolved by the Bitcoin Cash split, and like what should be possible and what should not be possible as a transaction. What should contracts look like? What is the long-term vision for how contracts work in the system? And then there are also some other game theory things that weren't possible as an option until the double spend proof idea came about. And so combining some of those things and getting to a solution that was like, oh, okay, the puzzle pieces actually all fit together now. That was very exciting. But it was also like kind of so shocking that I would like dare say that I thought I had a solution that worked this way. Quite literally, that's it. That I would even dare say that I think I have a instant finality solution that is trustless, doesn't require us messing with the block times or with miner incentives or doing proof of stake, mining validator proof of stake. There are just so many other solutions that every other cryptocurrency has tried, and there was this one that required some special sauce that Bitcoin Cash had, and required just like looking at this problem that people have rammed their head on for many, many times, and just like keep focusing on it it's not even something that I was myself alone motivated enough to work on. It was actually like other friends and colleagues that are interested in Bitcoin Cash, and I worked with a Bitcoin Cash at BitPay, who were like, "No, dude, there's got to be a solution here." I'm like, "Nah, there's definitely not a solution there." It turns out there was. I mean, it took us like a year and a half of like, "No, that's not a solution." And what about this? And so yeah, there was a long. There was a lot of rumination there between sort of 2019 is, I think, when everybody kind of assumed it was dead with zero comp forfeits, which had it slightly was super close, super close, but didn't quite have the help of knowing that this double spend proofs would be an idea that worked on Bitcoin Cash, and so that solves the chief problem of creating an escrow based game theory setup where you can have super good finality based on an advanced commitment. So yeah, it's super. I'm very excited there, and it really, I think it was held up a lot by first, and I'm sure people who are listening to this are still incredulous. There are definitely going to be some people who are like, "There's no way it works that way," and please let me know if you find an issue. I would like to know, because I do expect to pick it up pretty soon again, and yeah, I think that the 5 seconds of relay is not just a good idea. It is specifically, like, from the perspective of the network, it is a pro-social thing for every node to try to relay these confiscation transactions specifically. It's actually it does essentially what double spend proofs does, but it's kind of one step better in that for some time there were some Bitcoin Cash nodes that chose to relay double spend attempts, because out of a wanting to help merchants see them and immediately try to punish the illegal activity. But in practice, that actually increases the risk of fraud. And so it's something that we kind of had to learn, that the pro-social thing for the network to do is to squelch double spends and not relay them. Honest, normal Bitcoin Cash users don't want double spends to be sent around, because it makes those zero conf transactions just a little bit less secure, and we want them to work as well as possible. But I would say there's also another level where double spend proofs goes another step and sends around a proof that this person double spent. That's really awesome. Now we can actually, instead of sending around a proof and having the merchant have to do anything about it, we can actually just execute the confiscation and send that around. and the attacker gets automatically punished, and the merchant automatically gets their money, which is just the best solution. The best solution is something the merchant does not have to do. I mean, their wallet has to look at the transaction, but they can do it with very limited state, and certainly the state that they already have if they have a payment system. So yeah, the proposal has been out there for 3 years. I challenge anyone to show me how it doesn't produce good finality immediately and can be respent again with another ZCE providing great finality as well. And in the chip, I don't want to be imprecise. So in the chip, I say specifically what scenarios you get as good as one comp finality, and I think I even reeled it back because I wasn't really confident in it in 2021. But there are some scenarios in which I believe it is better than 10 comp finality, at least on Bitcoin Cash right now. So yeah, I'm interested in reviews there too. I would love to have those, and I do plan on working on that. And soon, certainly after November, we'll see.
Yes. Looking forward to that. Okay, well, we're going to have to get you out of here on time in a minute. But firstly, we always have our final message to the community slide. I don't know, take as quick or as long as you want on that message to the community. What does the BCH community need to hear? I had a lot of stuff that I talked about there. Sorry, for the community, we are looking now for sort of final reviews on these chips. The process now is, as we move into October, they will be truly finalized. So now is the time, if you want to help us get the spec to somewhere where you feel it needs to be. By October, it is truly finalized. The implementations are done, and the final step of the process begins. And then already we are looking for final statements, also final stakeholder statements. So if you're excited about where these proposals are, please help us demonstrate widespread community consensus. I am also in October, a big step of the chip process is not only to have inbound and broadcast publication sort of approvals, but to specifically ask for approval. And I'll be in your inbox. Whether you contact me or not, I'm sorry, but this month will be important, and I hope to hear your response, whether it is approve, disapprove, or abstain. And we are going to get it in the public record. I hope that we can. I believe both of these proposals are technically complete and very solidly implemented. I'm very excited about what they do for Bitcoin Cash, and I hope that they activate in 2025. Perfect. All right. Bit of homework for all the listeners there. Get involved in putting in a statement. Okay. Our supporter appreciation. Thank you very much to our donators. As always, thank you to our patrons, Ricky and HP. Thank you to our sponsors, General Protocols. Check out bchbull.com, and our FundMe contributors. Of course, you can go to fundme.cash and get yourself on this list with at least half a BCH contributed. Majumali Marcelo, 2024.bcharg bitcoincash.rg.com. We'll be talking to him in 2 days on Saturday about the conference and everything that's going to be coming up there. So you can all look forward to that. We got Molecular, Erdogan Talk, Peter Wulle. I think the goal should be and can realistically be everyone simultaneously having on-chain funds. Emergent Reasons, Stay Grounded, Stay Awesome, P2P, Electronic Cash for the World, Cash Stamps, biggest soundboard for BCH we have yet. Keep up with the great job, guys. Yeah, beer. Try to get Vlad Kostia on one of these next episodes. We've talked about that in the past. That will do it for the show pretty much. We also have the website at bitcoincashpodcast.com. If you're new, listen to episode 85 and try Selene Wallet at selene.cash. Jason, where can people find more of you? On Twitter, Telegram, right? Bitcoin Cash Research.
Yeah, Twitter, bitjason, bitjson, and bitjason.com, bitjson.com. And, if you go there, you'll find links to other places and Bitcoin Cash Research forums and, Reddit and et cetera.
Anything you want to shout out specifically?
Well, big thank you to Callan and the other contributors at BCHN who have been, carrying the implementations for a long time now. Absolutely would not have happened this year if it hadn't been committed to hard in February. And even just getting me back on it it got me back on it when they committed. So yeah, thank you all.
Jet, any shout outs this week? Nope. And my shout out goes to everyone who's in the chat. We've had some good chat there. Bitcoin Jason, the other Bitcoin Jason, saying, I love this interview. We had Kevin McCormack talking about he had to wait 6 hours and pay $52 on BTC for one transaction while at consensus. So people still getting plagued with problems there. And we had a bunch of other people chatting away. And I always really like seeing some live interaction with the show. It's amazing. And the community is definitely growing because I keep seeing fresh names and more chat week after week after week. So yeah, things are going in the right direction there for sure. Thank you all for listening. Till next time.
Reports that more than 500,000 Iraqi children have died as a direct result of U.S. sanctions. It's not just theoretical. These are real people with real lives. 500,000 kids? I'm sorry for shouting, but it just disgusts me what these people in government do. And they do it through central banking and through the control of the money supply, and Bitcoin takes that away from them.
This is the sound of freedom coming out your speakers. Are they playing hide and seek or finders keepers? Let me define my thesis. While they treasonous deep in the malfeasance, a grand deception, 1,000 reasons, keeping the truth.